Introductory Notice. This case file contains a set of documents retrieved from the Eastern Perimeter, Sector B. The materials have been reviewed and transcribed in their original order. Where text was unclear in the source documents, the closest readable approximation has been included. Redactions present in the originals have been preserved without modification. The documents in this case file span several days in early September 1992. Although grouped together in the archive, their formatting and handling marks suggest that they were compiled across multiple desks, rather than being assembled as part of a single coordinated investigation. Minor inconsistencies between entries have been left intact, as these variations are useful for understanding the chain of custody and the manner in which these materials passed through Division 3. Archive Header. Archive Reference, OSD3, Eastern Perimeter Case File, 01. The materials were located within Boundary Locker 7B, positioned slightly east of Marker Post B-3. The locker is typically used for temporary field transfers, though the precise date and reason for this placement remain unclear in the surviving paperwork. Condition of the document sleeve was recorded at the point of retrieval. Surface abrasion was present across the upper edge, and there were signs of mild moisture exposure. A single audio cassette was included within the sleeve, the casing was cracked and the tape partially compromised. Temperature of the sleeve at the moment of retrieval was 14.2 degrees Celsius, slightly lower than the ambient environment. This detail was logged due to the persistence of the temperature reading across several documents in this collection. Acquisition Summary. The sleeve was recovered by Field Operative H. Lenton during a routine perimeter inspection carried out shortly after 0920 hours. Inside were several loose pages, one stapled memorandum packet, a pair of technical printouts, incomplete evidence tags, and an envelope fragment bearing a routing note. These materials appear to have been handled multiple times before being placed in the locker, as indicated by layered date stamps and varying annotation styles. No signs of forced placement or concealment were noted at the site. However, the irregular assembly of documents suggests that they did not originate from a single department. The items were sent directly to Division 3 for review. Document Overview. The contents of this case file are presented in the order in which they were recovered. The sequence begins with 2 field logs recorded along the perimeter line. These are followed by an internal memorandum relating to a soil sample later designated Asset 14. Subsequent documents include analyst notes, a preliminary materials report, technical readings, evidence tags, environmental printouts, and a short damaged audio transcription. For clarity, each document will be introduced before being read. Archival commentary will follow where appropriate, offering context or drawing attention to irregularities that may assist in understanding the broader record. This record forms part of the Division 3 archival collection. Primary document begins. The first item in this case file is a handwritten field log. It is marked with the time 0912 and attributed to Operative 14-B. The log concerns a routine perimeter inspection carried out along the eastern boundary line near Marker Post B-3. The entry reads as follows. Light ground disturbance observed approximately 6 to 8 feet north of Marker Post B-3. Surface uneven but not recently displaced. No identifiable prints present. Only shallow compression lines running parallel to the boundary fence. Wind conditions minimal. Air temperature stable. No vibration detected through boots during inspection. Fence integrity appears normal. A faint mechanical hum present, consistent with expected perimeter equipment output at this time of morning. A brief static spike recorded on the handheld unit at 0910. Duration less than 1 second. Recommendation entered for a secondary sweep. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The handwriting in this entry is narrow and compressed. Several letters overlap, particularly in the opening lines, suggesting the log may have been written while the operative was standing rather than seated. Similar compression appears in later documents within this case file, which may indicate uneven ground conditions at the point of writing. The reference to shallow compression lines is notable. The operative does not describe them as footprints, nor as marks left by equipment or animals. Instead, the wording suggests impressions that were visible only under certain angles or lighting conditions, though this is not explicitly stated at this stage. The mechanical hum noted along the fence line is described as consistent with expected output. This phrasing appears in several routine logs from the same period and is typically used to indicate that no immediate maintenance concern was identified. However, the inclusion of the hum alongside other observations implies that the operative considered it worth recording, even if it did not initially appear unusual. The brief static spike recorded on the handheld unit is similarly understated. The duration is short, and no follow-up measurement is included in this entry. Such spikes are not uncommon in perimeter inspections, particularly near active equipment. Nevertheless, the operative chose to timestamp the event, which suggests a degree of attentiveness beyond standard procedure. The recommendation for a secondary sweep concludes the entry. This indicates that the operative did not regard the observations as conclusive. Rather than escalating the matter, the operative opted for further observation under slightly altered conditions. As subsequent documents will show, this recommendation was acted upon within minutes. Archivist commentary continued. Before proceeding to the next document, it is useful to pause briefly on the nature of the observations recorded in the initial field log. Routine perimeter inspections generate a high volume of documentation. Most entries are formulaic, noting fence condition, ground stability, and equipment status with minimal variation. In this instance, the operative's language remains within procedural norms, yet several details are recorded with greater specificity than is typically required for a routine pass. The description of the ground disturbance is careful. The operative does not claim recent displacement, nor do they attribute the uneven surface to any known cause. Instead, the entry emphasizes what is not present: no identifiable prints, no obvious tracks, no vibration underfoot. This negative space in the reporting suggests that the operative was actively attempting to rule out common explanations before committing the observation to the log. Compression lines running parallel to the fence line are mentioned without further interpretation. Such markings could arise from maintenance activity, environmental settling, or repeated foot traffic along the boundary. However, the absence of any associated impressions complicates these explanations. The operative does not speculate, but the phrasing implies a degree of uncertainty that merits attention. The handheld unit static spike, though brief, is treated with similar restraint. The operative does not report interference during the inspection itself, only upon reviewing the recording. This distinction appears in several documents within this case file and may indicate that certain irregularities were not perceptible in real time. In most routine cases, such a brief spike would be disregarded or omitted entirely. Here, it is time-stamped and included alongside environmental conditions. The decision to log it suggests that the operative considered it potentially relevant, even if its significance was not immediately apparent. The recommendation for a secondary sweep is consistent with Division 3 procedure when initial observations do not yield a clear classification. It reflects a preference for verification rather than escalation. By altering lighting conditions and revisiting the same location shortly after the initial pass, the operative could determine whether the impressions were persistent, transient, or dependent on external factors. This approach aligns with standard field practice. It also indicates that the operative was not satisfied that the initial inspection had fully accounted for the observed irregularities. The next document in this sequence was recorded only minutes later. It represents the outcome of that secondary sweep and provides additional context for the initial observations. Primary document continues. The second item in the sequence is a follow-up field log, recorded only minutes after the first. It is marked with the time 0914 and attributed to the same operative, 14-B. The entry corresponds to a secondary sweep of the same boundary location near marker post B-3. The entry reads as follows. Secondary sweep underway. Low-angle morning light reveals shallow impressions not visible earlier. The impressions appear evenly spaced at approximately 50 centimeters apart. Depth negligible. No further markings found. Recorder interference present again. A short burst of static can be heard upon playback, lasting just over 1 second. Operative notes that this distortion was not audible at the time of recording. Temperature reading stable at 14.3 degrees Celsius. No tracks beyond the initial impressions. Operative questions whether subsidence may be responsible. Sample taken for further review. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The change in lighting conditions appears to be the most significant variable between the first and second inspections. The operative specifically notes that the impressions were revealed only under low-angle light, suggesting that they were subtle enough to escape notice during the initial pass. Even spacing is a detail worth noting. The impressions are described as consistent in distance, yet shallow enough to resist easy classification. They are not characterized as footprints, nor are they linked to known equipment or environmental features. The operative again avoids speculation, recording the observation without interpretation. The recurrence of recorder interference mirrors the static spike noted earlier. Once again, the distortion is only detected during playback. This repetition strengthens the decision to log the anomaly, even though its duration remains brief and its source unidentified. The temperature reading is included despite remaining stable. The operative records the figure with precision, which may reflect an awareness that environmental conditions could later prove relevant to the sample. The mention of subsidence is framed as a question rather than a conclusion. This cautious phrasing suggests that the operative was actively testing explanations rather than asserting them. By collecting a sample for further review, the operative shifts the focus from observation to analysis, transferring responsibility to the materials and technical desks. This decision marks the point at which the boundary irregularities move from routine field documentation into a broader administrative process. Archivist commentary continued. The second field log closes the observational phase of this sequence and introduces the first deliberate act of material retrieval. Up to this point, the operative's actions remain within routine parameters. With the decision to collect a sample, the matter shifts from environmental monitoring to physical analysis. The role of lighting in revealing the impressions is particularly instructive. Low-angle light can accentuate shallow variations in surface texture that would otherwise remain invisible. This suggests that the impressions were not newly formed, but had been present long enough to settle into the surrounding ground. The absence of depth indicates that whatever produced them did not apply sustained downward force. Even spacing remains the most ambiguous feature. Patterns formed by natural processes tend to vary irregularly, while mechanical or procedural activities often produce consistent intervals. The operative does not draw this distinction explicitly, but the choice to measure and record spacing implies that the regularity was noted as unusual. The decision to question subsidence is appropriate within Division 3 procedure. Ground settling is a common explanation for minor boundary irregularities, particularly in areas with older infrastructure. However, subsidence typically presents as broader depressions rather than discrete, evenly spaced impressions. The repetition of recorder interference deserves further attention. In both instances, the static is detected only during playback. This suggests that the interference did not disrupt the operative's immediate situational awareness, yet was preserved in the recorded data. Such discrepancies between live perception and recorded output appear elsewhere in the archive, though they are rarely sustained across multiple entries. The operative's continued inclusion of stable temperature readings may indicate an emerging awareness of environmental consistency. While the figures themselves remain unremarkable, their persistence across entries becomes a reference point once the sample enters controlled analysis. By the end of the second log, the operative's role effectively concludes. Responsibility for interpretation now passes to the desks responsible for materials handling and technical review. The boundary itself recedes into the background, replaced by a focus on the sample and its documented properties. The next document formalizes this transition. Internal memorandum begins. The next item in the case file is an internal memorandum circulated within Division 3. It concerns the soil sample retrieved during the secondary perimeter sweep and establishes its provisional classification. The memorandum is addressed to the Materials Desk Interim Analysis Unit. It is authored by Analyst D. Merrin and dated 3 September, 1992. The text reads as follows. A soil sample retrieved from the Sector B boundary shows standard composition under baseline lighting conditions. Under angled illumination, a faint shimmer is visible within the particulate layer. The shimmer is intermittent and non-directional. Handling notes. The analyst reports a mild sensation of heat when the material is touched directly, though repeated temperature readings remain fixed at 14.2 degrees Celsius. An electrical odor is present during agitation of the sample. No measurable discharge detected. Recommendation. Provisional designation, Asset 14, pending review. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The memorandum introduces the first explicit discrepancy between subjective experience and recorded measurement. While the temperature readings remain stable, the analyst notes a sensation of warmth during handling. This observation is presented without emphasis and without conjecture, yet it represents a departure from purely instrumental reporting. The reference to angled illumination echoes the field operative's observations regarding low-angle light. In both contexts, certain features become visible only under specific lighting conditions. The memorandum does not attempt to connect these observations, but the parallel is worth noting. The description of an electrical odor without measurable discharge is similarly restrained. Such odors are typically associated with equipment faults or static buildup. In this instance, the absence of any recorded discharge complicates interpretation, leaving the observation unclassified. By assigning a provisional designation, the analyst formalizes the sample status within Division 3's tracking system. The use of the term, pending review, indicates that the matter is not yet considered anomalous, but warrants continued observation. This memorandum marks the point at which the sample becomes an administrative object, subject to desk-level analysis and procedural handling rather than field assessment. Analyst notes begin. The next item in the case file consists of handwritten analyst notes. These appear to have been taken during repeated measurements and informal handling of the sample designated Asset 14. The notes read as follows. Temperature measurements repeated at intervals. All readings stable between 14.2 and 14.3 degrees Celsius. During manual rotation of the sample, a momentary increase in perceived warmth occurs at the fingertips. Thermal probe shows no deviation during these moments. Light reflection. A particulate shimmer becomes visible again at 1740 hours when the overhead lamp is partially obstructed by the shelving unit. Angle appears to influence visibility. Recommendation. Examine under controlled lighting at multiple elevations. Signed, L. Haror. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The informal nature of these notes contrasts with the structured language of the preceding memorandum. Measurements are recorded precisely, yet the observations surrounding tactile sensation are presented cautiously, almost hesitantly. The repetition of stable temperature readings reinforces the consistency noted in earlier documents. Despite multiple measurements taken over time, no variation beyond a narrow range is recorded. This stability becomes increasingly prominent as subjective sensations recur without instrumental confirmation. The reference to lighting conditions mirrors earlier observations from both the field and laboratory contexts. Once again, visibility of certain features depends on angle and obstruction rather than intensity alone. The analyst does not speculate on the cause, choosing instead to recommend further examination under controlled conditions. The signature provides a point of accountability, yet no follow-up annotation appears in the margins. Whether the recommended lighting tests were carried out is not documented within this case file. As with several other entries, the notes conclude without resolution, passing responsibility onward rather than drawing conclusions. The next document represents the first formal response from the materials desk following receipt of the sample and associated notes. Materials desk report begins. The next document in the case file is a preliminary report issued by the materials desk following initial examination of the retrieved sample. This report attempts to categorize the material prior to any extended analysis or escalation. The report reads as follows. Desk reference, Asset 14, Preliminary Classification. Date, 5th of September, 1992. Mass of sample, 112 grams. Composition, clay and silt mixture with atypical granularity. Moisture content, 11%. Temperature, 14.3 degrees Celsius, stable. Observations. Fine particulate features show intermittent reflectivity. A faint metallic odor is present. No biological activity detected. Cohesion of the material is higher than expected under laboratory humidity. Action taken. Forwarded to Technical Review Desk for extended examination. Asset 14 remains provisional. Signed, D. Ashby. Document ends. Archivist commentary. This report consolidates several observations made independently in earlier documents. Stable temperature readings are confirmed once again, reinforcing the consistency noted by both field and analyst staff. Despite this stability, the material exhibits properties that do not align neatly with standard classifications. The reference to atypical granularity introduces a subtle shift in tone. While the composition remains within expected parameters, the physical structure of the sample appears irregular. The report does not quantify this irregularity beyond noting increased cohesion, leaving the description deliberately imprecise. The recurrence of odor observations is also noteworthy. Earlier references described the smell as electrical. Here, it is characterized as metallic. Whether this reflects a change in perception, a difference in handling conditions, or a lack of standard terminology is not addressed. The decision to forward the sample to the technical review desk indicates that routine materials analysis was insufficient to account for all observed properties. This escalation remains procedural rather than urgent. The language of the report avoids any suggestion of risk, framing the transfer as a continuation of due process. With this handover, Asset 14 moves fully into the technical evaluation phase. The next document records the measurements taken during that stage. Technical observation sheet begins. The next document in the sequence originates from the technical review desk. It records a series of controlled measurements taken after the sample designated Asset 14 was transferred for extended examination. The observation sheet reads as follows. Thermal reading. Constant at 14.2 degrees Celsius. Margin of variation plus or minus 0.03 degrees. Acoustic reading. A faint hum detected between 48 and 51 Hz when measurements are taken within 1.2 meters of the sample. Technician note. The hum may originate from surrounding equipment, although no device in the room operates at this frequency. Electrical reading. No measurable discharge detected. Surface scan. Irregular microtexture observed with a non-repeating pattern. Document ends. Archivist commentary. This document is notable for the density of technical data presented in a relatively short format. Measurements are precise and carefully bounded, reflecting standard practice within the technical review desk. The persistence of the 14.2 degree temperature reading continues here, now accompanied by a defined margin of variation. This level of consistency would ordinarily be considered unremarkable. However, within the context of repeated tactile observations, it becomes a reference point against which other irregularities are implicitly measured. The acoustic reading introduces a new variable. Low-frequency hums are common in technical environments, often produced by ventilation systems or adjacent equipment. In this instance, the technician explicitly notes the absence of a known source operating at the recorded frequency range. The comment regarding equipment suggests an awareness that the observation may be artifactual. At the same time, its inclusion indicates that the reading could not be dismissed outright. As with earlier documents, the tone remains cautious, favoring documentation over interpretation. The surface scan adds another layer to the developing profile of the sample. A non-repeating microtexture implies structural variation at a scale not visible during field inspection. Whether this texture was present prior to retrieval or emerged during handling is not addressed. This concludes the formal technical assessment recorded in the case file. The remaining materials consist of supplemental items and correspondence generated as the sample continued to circulate between desks. Supplemental materials begin. The next group of items in the case file consists of supplemental materials recovered from the same document sleeve. These items are not formally bound and appear to have been gathered incidentally rather than as part of a single reporting process. The first item is a partially preserved evidence tag. The tag reads: Office of Special Documentation. Evidence designation 14-B. Date stamp incomplete. A handwritten note appears in the margin. Return to desk 4A if misfiled. No author signature is present. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The incomplete nature of the tag suggests that it was either removed from its original attachment or never fully processed. The routing note implies that the item passed through multiple desks before being placed in the locker. Desk 4A is referenced elsewhere in Division 3 records as a general intake point rather than a specialist unit. The absence of a full date stamp limits the usefulness of the tag for reconstructing the chain of custody. However, its inclusion alongside the other materials indicates that the sample continued to circulate informally after its initial classification. Environmental printout begins. The next item is a dot matrix environmental printout. The printout reads: Time, 15:32 hours. Temperature, 14.3 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 58%. Electrical noise, mild, non-directional. A note is appended at the bottom of the page. Repeat anomaly at low elevation. Check equipment. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The environmental data aligns closely with earlier readings. Temperature remains within the same narrow range observed throughout the case file. Humidity and electrical noise are recorded without emphasis, though the appended note suggests that at least one reading was considered unusual enough to warrant verification. The phrase, repeat anomaly, implies that similar readings may have occurred previously, though no additional printouts are included here. Handwritten note begins. A small handwritten note was found inside an envelope fragment. The transcription reads: B-3 line needs review. Not subsidence. Something else. Check with Merin. The signature is unclear. The ink appears slightly smudged, possibly due to moisture exposure. Archivist commentary. This note departs from the measured tone of the formal documents. The phrasing is brief and directive, suggesting internal communication rather than official reporting. The explicit dismissal of subsidence mirrors earlier uncertainty expressed in the field logs, though here it is stated more decisively. The reference to analyst Merin connects this note to the internal memorandum, implying that concerns regarding the sample may have been shared informally across desks. Audio transcript fragment begins. The final supplemental item is a partial transcript recovered from a damaged audio cassette. Audio clarity is poor. Static is present throughout. The transcript reads: Perimeter, no, that isn't. Impression is deeper than. The recording ends abruptly. No further audio could be recovered. Archivist commentary. The fragmentary nature of the audio limits its interpretive value. Nevertheless, the reference to impressions appears consistent with earlier observations recorded in the field logs. Whether this recording corresponds to the same inspection or a subsequent visit cannot be confirmed from the available material. With the supplemental items reviewed, the case file moves toward its final administrative correspondence. Cross-department memo begins. The next document in the case file is a memorandum exchanged between divisions. It reflects a request for clarification rather than an escalation. The memo reads: From Division 1, Structural Oversight Desk. To Division 3, Field Operations. Dated the 6th of September, 1992. Request for clarification regarding impressions logged during the 3rd of September perimeter inspection near marker post B-3. Division 1 notes that ground stability surveys conducted earlier that month showed no indicators of subsidence in the affected area. One line is underlined. No automatic markers triggered. Unclear what prompted follow-up sweep. Document ends. Archivist commentary. This memorandum highlights a divergence in perspective between departments. Division 1's assessment is based on prior surveys and automated systems. From that standpoint, the recorded impressions appear inconsistent with known structural data. The underlined line suggests that the follow-up sweep recorded by the field operative was not anticipated by monitoring systems. Rather than disputing the field logs directly, the memo seeks clarification, indicating uncertainty rather than disagreement. Materials Desk reply begins. A reply from the Materials Desk follows shortly after. The reply reads: From the Materials Desk, Interim Analysis Unit. To Division 1, Structural Oversight. Dated the 7th of September, 1992. Asset 14 remains under review. Temperature stability confirmed across independent measurements. Particulate behavior irregular but non-reactive. No immediate risk identified. Recommendation: continue to observe perimeter conditions. Review additional samples if retrieved. One line has been redacted. Document ends. Archivist commentary. The reply adopts a conciliatory tone. It neither confirms nor dismisses the concerns raised by Division 1. Instead, it reiterates measured stability while acknowledging irregular behavior at a material level. The redacted line limits further interpretation. Without context, it is unclear whether the omission relates to classification, personnel, or procedural considerations. Its presence indicates that not all aspects of the discussion were intended for broader circulation. With this correspondence, formal documentation within the case file concludes. Closing review summary. The documents contained within this case file describe a limited series of observations recorded along the eastern perimeter during the first week of September 1992. Individually, none of the entries would ordinarily warrant escalation beyond routine review. Taken together, they form a modest but recurring pattern of environmental irregularities and material inconsistencies. Field logs record shallow surface impressions detected only under specific lighting conditions. These impressions were evenly spaced, lacked depth, and did not correspond to known causes such as subsidence, equipment movement, or animal activity. Recorder interference was noted on more than one occasion, though only during playback and not during live observation. Subsequent handling of the retrieved sample revealed further consistencies. Temperature readings remained stable across multiple contexts, despite repeated subjective reports of warmth during manual contact. Particulate shimmer appeared intermittently, visible only at narrow angles of illumination. Odor descriptions varied slightly between observers, though no measurable discharge or biological activity was detected. Technical measurements confirmed the absence of reactive behavior. Acoustic readings identified a low-frequency hum without a clear source, and surface scans revealed irregular microtextures not documented during field inspection. These findings were recorded without interpretation and passed between desks in accordance with Division 3 procedure. Supplemental materials suggest that some staff questioned subsidence as an explanation, though this view was not formalized in the surviving documentation. Interdepartmental correspondence reflects uncertainty rather than disagreement, with no automated systems registering anomalies sufficient to trigger escalation. Asset 14 remained under review at the close of the documented period. No follow-up reports, reclassification notices, or extended analyses appear in this case file. Whether additional samples were retrieved, or whether the observed irregularities persisted beyond the dates recorded here, cannot be determined from the available material. This record has been presented as preserved in the archive. No conclusions have been added, and no interpretations beyond procedural context have been introduced. The absence of further documentation limits definitive assessment. The case file is therefore closed pending additional material.